The scream tore through the night like a blade. I could hear it from my bedroom window, muffled but sharp, raw with terror. My heart slammed against my ribs, and my stomach twisted into knots. It was not coming from the street. It was not coming from the woods. It was coming from our backyard. I threw open the window and peered into the shadows. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, leaving the garden in a black, trembling silence. And then I saw her, my grandmother. She stood in the middle of the yard, her figure hunched and shaking, holding something small and pale in her arms. The thing wriggled, and I realized with a sickening clarity it was a child. Her head flopped unnaturally to one side, eyes wide with fear. She did not notice me. She never did. She whispered something I could not hear, a soft lullaby that dripped like honey over blood. And then the child went still. I pressed my hands against my mouth to stop the scream that threatened to escape, frozen in disbelief. My grandmother, my sweet, smiling grandmother, was no longer human. She was a predator, silent and calculating. And in that moment I knew the stories I had laughed off as a child, the whispered warnings of neighbors, the rumors of missing children. They had all been true. The village had always seemed calm to outsiders, but beneath the quiet, there was tension that no visitor could ever notice. Cobblestone streets curved lazily between the houses. Gardens bloomed with colors that seemed almost cheerful, and smoke curled from the chimneys like the village itself was breathing peacefully. But those of us who lived here knew better. There was a darkness beneath the surface. Every time a child ran too far, every time a parent let their gaze wander, there was a fear that had grown for decades, unspoken but understood. "You should not let the children play outside alone," warned Mrs. Karpov, my neighbor, when I passed her on the street that afternoon, holding a basket of freshly baked pies. Her eyes were wide, and she clutched the shawl around her shoulders as if it could protect her from whatever evil walked the village at night. I had smiled, waved, and kept running, brushing off her warning as one of the endless superstitions that old people clung to when the world began to frighten them. I wanted to believe it was nothing. I wanted to believe my grandmother was the gentle, caring woman who made the softest blankets, who sang lullabies to every child she met, who baked sweets and knelt patiently as I learned to knit. But that scream, the scream I had heard that night, was a truth I could not escape. The first child disappeared quietly. It was Michael, a boy from down the street, only 7 years old. Everyone assumed he had wandered off, that he had gone to a friend's house or gotten lost in the woods. Days passed. Parents called out. I searched the streets, and eventually the authorities came. But they found nothing, not a single clue. Just an empty house and the lingering sense of wrongness that no one could name. I remember walking past his house on my way to the bakery. His mother hung a fresh set of curtains in the window, but the sadness behind her eyes could not be hidden. Neighbors whispered that my grandmother had been seen talking to Michael the day he vanished, that she had offered him candy from a tin she always carried, but no one said it loud enough for anyone else to hear. I shrugged again. Children wandered off all the time, did not they? And yet, something gnawed at me. It was the way she moved, subtle and deliberate, as if the world bent around her. I started noticing things, the faint sound of wheels rolling softly in the night, the way she hummed songs no one remembered learning, and the way children seemed drawn to her, laughing nervously, trusting her in a way that set my stomach twisting. I wanted to ask her why, wanted to demand the truth, but the fear in my chest was heavier than my words. Then came Liza. She was a small girl, no older than 6, with golden hair that glinted in the sun. I saw her standing near the gate one afternoon, holding a doll. My grandmother approached slowly, her voice soft and sweet. "Do you want to see something beautiful?" Liza's eyes lit up, and she followed willingly, ignoring the strange chill that ran down my spine. I waited, hidden behind the fence, heart hammering. Hours passed. The sun dipped behind the trees, and Liza never returned. I should have screamed. I should have run to the authorities, but my mind froze, caught between disbelief and horror. That night I stayed awake, listening. From the garden came soft noises, whispers, the crunch of leaves, a lullaby that seemed to rise from the earth itself. I pressed my face to the window, my hands shaking, and saw her again. My grandmother, holding the little girl, stroking her hair. But Liza's eyes were wide, terrified, staring not at her grandmother, but at me. And then she was gone. From that night on, the village felt different. Shadows stretched longer. Children were no longer allowed to play outside without someone watching. Every parent whispered warnings to their children, and every adult avoided my grandmother's gaze. And yet, she moved freely, smiling, baking, knitting, appearing exactly as the sweet old woman everyone expected her to be. But I knew the truth. I began watching her, following her movements. Every corner of the garden, every hidden path in the village, every darkened alley she walked, I memorized it all. I saw the baskets she carried, full of sweets and toys, and I saw how children were drawn to them. She would kneel, talk softly, hum the songs that chilled me, and the children would follow her willingly into shadows. Sometimes I tried to warn them. Sometimes I shouted, but by the time anyone reacted, she was gone with the child. It became a pattern. Each disappearance was precise, clean, leaving only the whispers behind. And then I found the diary. Her room was always neat, smelling faintly of lavender and cinnamon. But one afternoon, while she napped, curiosity overcame me. I opened a drawer I had never seen, and there it was, an old leather-bound diary, pages yellowed with age, edges curled. I opened it carefully, almost afraid the words themselves might bite. The handwriting was elegant, precise. Names were listed, dates carefully noted. Michael, 7th of April, missing at dusk. Liza, 15th of May, found at the edge of the forest. Notes followed, describing behaviors, preferences, reactions. The entries were clinical, cold, meticulous. She wrote of her methods, of the way she selected the children, of the traps she set, and the satisfaction she derived from watching fear blossom in their eyes before the end. A cold wave of nausea swept over me. My grandmother, my sweet grandmother, was a predator. She had been hunting children for decades, and now I understood the whispers, the warnings, the fear that had lingered in the village like smoke. The diary weighed heavily in my hands, each page a testimony to the horror that had been unfolding under our noses for decades. I hid it beneath my mattress, too terrified to even think about what I might do with it. My grandmother hummed from the kitchen downstairs, her voice light and melodic, completely ordinary, and yet I could no longer hear it as comforting. It was a lullaby of death, a sound that drew children to her trap as surely as bees are drawn to honey. Days passed, but the fear inside me grew. The village tried to return to normal. Children were allowed outside, but only under watchful eyes, and even then, parents whispered anxiously to each other. I saw neighbors glance at my grandmother with a mix of fear and suspicion, but no one dared confront her. And why would they? She was part of the fabric of the village, woven into its history, into its celebrations, into the sweet-smelling kitchens and the gentle advice offered to every child. How could a woman so ordinary, so loving-seeming, be a monster? But I knew. I had seen. I had read. One evening, after dinner, I decided I could no longer be a passive observer. I had to understand her methods, even if it terrified me. I followed her at a distance as she strolled toward the woods, the basket of sweets swinging from her arm. The village streets were empty, the only light coming from the pale moon struggling through the clouds. She moved deliberately, silently, yet her presence seemed to command the night itself. Shadows parted before her, leaves fell softly as though the earth bowed to her steps. I crouched behind a low stone wall, heart hammering. Through the trees I saw her kneel and speak to a figure. It was a small boy, no older than I had been a few months ago. His eyes shone with trust, and he reached out to her without hesitation. I wanted to run forward, to scream, to do something, anything, but my legs refused to move. I was frozen by fear and disbelief. The boy laughed nervously, a sound that twisted into terror the moment my grandmother's shadow enveloped him. I did not see what happened next. I dared not breathe, dared not blink, because I feared even my attention could draw her gaze. When I looked again, the boy was gone. Just a faint rustle among the leaves, and a soft humming that rose like a hymn from the darkness. I swallowed bile, trembling. The realization hit me like ice. She had done it again, silently, efficiently, without leaving any trace. That night, I barely slept. The diary burned in my thoughts. I remembered every name, every date, every careful note she had made. I realized she had a system, a pattern. Each child she selected had traits she admired or despised. She studied them like a scientist, noting their fears, their habits, their weaknesses. And when the moment came, she struck, quietly, mercilessly, leaving only the echo of screams no one else would hear. Over the next few days, I became obsessed. I watched her from my window, noting the children she spoke to, the ways she coaxed them toward the woods. I memorized her routes, the time she left the house, the soft sound of her shoes on the cobblestones. I began writing my own notes, trying to predict her next move, to understand her method. But the more I observed, the more I felt trapped, as if the village itself were a cage and she the keeper of its darkest secrets. One afternoon, I noticed a girl I had not seen before. Her hair was dark, tied back in a sloppy braid, and she carried a small doll in one hand. She wandered too close to the garden gate. My grandmother saw her immediately. Her lips curved into that familiar smile, warm and sweet, and she beckoned the girl closer. I held my breath, my stomach twisting. The girl hesitated, then took a step forward. I had to act. I ran toward her, waving my arms, shouting, "Do not go! Stay away from her!" My voice cracked, and my legs trembled, but the girl turned toward me. My grandmother paused, tilted her head slightly, studying me, and for a moment, I thought I had stopped her. The girl ran to me, and I grabbed her hand. But then, she smiled. It was not the smile of the sweet grandmother everyone knew. It was cold, predatory, almost amused. And in that moment, I felt it, the suffocating weight of her gaze, as if she could see my every fear, my every thought. The air around her seemed to vibrate with danger. I stumbled backward, dragging the girl with me, and when I looked again, my grandmother was gone. Just a whisper of movement in the trees, a soft hum fading into the night. I brought the girl home, trembling. She clung to me, her small body shaking. She would not speak, only pointing to the door where my grandmother had disappeared. I tried to tell my parents, but how could I explain the impossible? They listened politely, concerned, but their eyes carried doubt. Children tell stories, imagination runs wild, and yet I could see it in their faces, a flicker of unease, a shadow of recognition. Perhaps they, too, had suspected. I could not wait for them to act. I had to understand fully before it was too late. That night I crept into her room again, diary in hand. I read entries that made bile rise in my throat. The girl with the dark braid, next Thursday, her fear will be exquisite. My blood ran cold. Thursday was only 3 days away. I devised a plan. I would follow her. I would record everything, and I would try to save the next child. I stayed awake for 2 nights, barely sleeping, listening to the faint creaks of the floorboards, the soft hum that drifted from the kitchen. I knew she sensed my attention, and it terrified me. Somehow, she always seemed to know. Perhaps she could see through walls, through doors, into the very thoughts of the living. Thursday came. The sky was gray, clouds heavy, a wind whistling through the streets. I stationed myself behind the same stone wall I had used before, notebook in hand, ready to follow. My grandmother left the house carrying her basket, humming softly, and then I saw her move toward the girl. My stomach clenched. She reached out, and the girl hesitated. I wanted to leap out, to grab her, to shout, but the fear held me frozen in place. My grandmother leaned down, whispered something, and the girl's eyes went wide. Not with happiness, not with fear exactly, something else. Recognition, shock, and then she took a step forward. I lunged. I grabbed her hand, pulling with every ounce of strength I had. My grandmother's head snapped up, eyes narrowing. For a heartbeat, I saw the predator in her eyes, cold and unyielding. And then, she smiled. That same terrifying smile. It was enough to break me. I stumbled backward, dragging the girl, and suddenly she was gone. My grandmother had vanished, leaving only the rustle of leaves and the faint echo of that haunting lullaby. We ran home. I locked the doors, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I knew this was only the beginning. She would come again. She always did. And I was the only one who knew the truth. The diary became my only weapon, my only guide. I memorized her methods, the names of every child she had ever chosen, every note about their habits, fears, and weaknesses. I began to understand her pattern, and with each realization, my fear grew. I could not let her take another child, not on my watch. But even as I planned, even as I studied, I knew one truth that chilled me to the bone. She was always one step ahead. She had been hunting for decades, and she would not stop. And I was only a child. The village had grown quieter, but the weight of terror lingered in the air like a thick fog. Parents no longer let their children play beyond the gates, and the streets were empty before sunset. I could feel eyes on me everywhere, though I knew it was not the villagers who watched. It was her, my grandmother, the predator. She knew I was aware, and perhaps that awareness thrilled her as much as it terrified me. I spent days memorizing the diary, studying her patterns, her methods, her careful planning. Every detail mattered, the way she chose her victims, the timing, the traps she set without leaving a trace. I thought that if I could predict her next move, I could stop her. I could save the next child. But deep down, I knew it was a dangerous hope. She had hunted for decades and had never been caught. She was smarter, faster, and colder than anyone I had ever known. Thursday came again. The sky was a dull gray, heavy with clouds that pressed down like a warning. I had stationed myself near the edge of the woods, hiding behind the low stone wall I had used before. The basket of sweets in her hand swung gently as she walked, humming softly. Her presence was magnetic. Even from a distance, I could see the invisible threads that drew children toward her. And there she was, the girl with the dark braid, the one I had saved before. She wandered too close, curiosity and fear warring in her eyes. My heart hammered. I thought I could intervene. I had planned it meticulously. I would grab the child and run. I would end this. But she was always one step ahead. My grandmother crouched, whispered something, and the girl froze. Her eyes, wide with panic, darted toward me, but my grandmother's gaze held her in place. I tried to shout, to call the girl's name, but my voice caught in my throat. My legs refused to move. The diary in my pocket seemed useless, powerless against the living horror before me. Then I saw it, movement in the shadows behind me. Another child, a little boy from the next street, silently following my grandmother without hesitation, drawn like a moth to a flame. Panic surged through me. This was it. I could not save them all. Not today. I took a trembling step forward. My grandmother's head turned slowly, eyes locking onto mine. Her lips curved into that same terrifying, cold smile, and I knew that any misstep, any hesitation, would cost me dearly. I felt the weight of every disappearance, every silent scream, and every whispered warning the villagers had muttered over the decades. She stepped toward me, basket swinging. I grabbed the girl's hand, yanking her back. She resisted at first, confused and frightened, but I forced her along. The boy behind us began to cry out, but my grandmother's eyes followed him, and I realized with horror, she was not chasing us. She did not need to. The lure was enough. She raised a hand, soft as a whisper, and the boy froze completely. "No," I whispered, clutching the girl tightly. I could not leave him behind, but I could not save him either. My grandmother had eyes everywhere. She had been watching, always watching. In a heartbeat, she was beside him. The boy's scream was sharp, piercing, and then cut short. I fell to my knees, the girl screaming in my arms. My grandmother stood, calm, serene, as if nothing had happened, basket still swinging gently. I ran with the girl, never looking back. I did not stop until the village faded behind us, until the woods swallowed us in shadows. But even there, even in the supposed safety of the trees, I knew she was there. I could feel her presence in the air, cold and suffocating, whispering through the leaves, humming that lullaby that belonged only to death. We hid for hours, shivering, breathless, until the first light of dawn crept over the horizon. I dared a glance back, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw her silhouette against the edge of the woods. She raised her hand in a slow, deliberate wave, her smile soft but full of menace. I wanted to scream, to charge back, to fight, but I knew it was useless. She would never be caught. She had lived through decades of whispers and fear. She had survived every attempt to stop her. Days passed, but the terror did not fade. I told my parents everything, the diary, the children, what I had witnessed, but their faces remained a mixture of disbelief and fear. How could they understand? How could anyone? The village carried on, but the weight of her shadow had settled over all of us. Every child's laugh carried caution now. Every door was locked, and every parent watched their children as if letting them breathe freely might invite the predator back into their lives. And she did not stop. One evening, as I returned from a friend's house, I saw a small crowd gathered in the square. My stomach dropped as I recognized the tiny shoes of the children lined up, each one missing a sock, a toy, or a hat. The whispers rose like smoke. Another child had vanished, and in the shadows, standing at the edge of the gathering, I saw her, my grandmother, basket swinging, lips curved into that soft, terrifying smile. Her eyes met mine, and I felt the full weight of despair. There was nothing I could do. I hid the diary once more, clutching it as if it could somehow protect me. I began avoiding the streets, avoiding the children, avoiding life itself. The village had become a prison, and she its warden. I realized, with a cold clarity, that this was not something one could fight, reason with, or escape. She had hunted before me, she hunted through me, and she would hunt long after I was gone. The girl I had saved clung to me, and I held her as tightly as I could, whispering promises I did not believe I could keep. Every night, I listened for the lullaby that might come to take her too. And sometimes, in the quietest moments, I thought I saw a shadow moving past the window, waiting. Because predators do not sleep, they do not tire, and monsters do not die easily. My grandmother had always been there, smiling, sweet, patient, and she would always be there, waiting for the next child, the next scream, the next shadow to fall. I had survived, but survival felt empty. The village whispered her name in fear. The children lived under the weight of her shadow. And I knew, deep in my bones, that this nightmare would never end. And that realization, colder than any night wind, was the heaviest burden of all.